On a rainy train ride home, a powerful CEO fell asleep on the shoulder of a tired single dad she had never met. When his stop arrived, he could have walked away and saved his own job, but one quiet decision changed both of their lives forever. She thought she had simply missed her station. She never imagined the stranger beside her had just sacrificed his last chance to protect her peace and uncover a truth that would shake her entire company. The late train from Philadelphia rocked south through the dark, its windows reflecting tired faces and winter rain. Gavin Hartley sat near the back with his 10-year-old daughter, Emma. His work jacket was faded, one cuff worn nearly white from years of grease and metal edges. The woman beside him had fallen asleep 20 minutes earlier. At first, her head had dipped forward. Then the train curved, and she slowly leaned against Gavin's shoulder. He stiffened, careful not to wake her. She wore a charcoal coat that looked expensive, but one button had been fastened through the wrong hole. A paper band circled her wrist. Riverside Hospice Center. Gavin looked away. Emma glanced over. "Dad," she whispered, "is she okay?" "I think she's just tired." The woman's hand remained closed around a bent sympathy card. Even asleep, her fingers tightened around it. Above the aisle, the digital sign flashed. Wilmington. Next stop. Emma sat up. "That's us." Gavin checked his phone. 11:31 p.m. A reminder filled the screen. Final employment appeal. 12 a.m. Failure to attend will close the case. At home, his old laptop was waiting on the kitchen table beside a stack of paperwork. If they got off now and hurried, he might make the call. The train began to slow. The sleeping woman shifted, and the metal zipper on Gavin's jacket pressed close to her cheek. Without touching her, he pulled the jacket loose, folded the rough edge inward, and placed the softer lining between her face and the zipper. Emma watched him. "Should we wake her?" Station lights appeared outside, pale against the wet platform. Gavin looked again at the hospice band. For 1 second, he was back in a hospital hallway 3 years earlier, holding Emma's little coat, while a doctor spoke in a voice too gentle to bring Rachel home. The doors opened. Cold air rushed into the car. Emma looked from the platform to her father. "Dad?" Gavin's jaw tightened. Then he gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not like this," he said. A warning chime sounded. The doors slid shut. Wilmington began moving backward beyond the glass. Emma stared at the disappearing platform, then at the phone still glowing in Gavin's hand. The woman slept on, unaware that the stranger beneath her cheek had just let his best chance to save his job vanish into the rain. The train picked up speed again, leaving the platform lights behind until they dissolved into streaks across the wet window. Emma lowered her voice. "Dad, are we really not getting off?" "No." "What about your meeting?" Gavin locked the screen before the reminder could flash again. "We'll figure something out." She wanted to ask how, but she knew that tone. It was the same quiet voice he used whenever he was carrying something too heavy to hand to a 10-year-old. The woman shifted slightly, letting out a slow breath. A strand of dark hair slipped across her face. Gavin carefully moved his shoulder instead of touching her, giving her head a steadier place to rest. Emma watched him for another moment. "You think she lost somebody?" It wasn't a question. Gavin glanced at the white paper band around the woman's wrist. "I think she probably did." Outside, the rain blurred warehouses, parking lots, and rows of dim apartment buildings into one endless ribbon of gray. 3 years earlier, another rainy night had ended with a doctor stepping into a hospital hallway carrying news no family ever wanted to hear. Gavin remembered Emma asleep across 2 waiting room chairs, still wearing the pink sneakers Rachel had bought only a week before. Some kinds of exhaustion couldn't be fixed with sleep. He looked back at the woman leaning against him. Maybe she was carrying one of those nights. The train conductor walked through the aisle, checking tickets. He slowed when he noticed the sleeping passenger. "She missed Wilmington," the conductor said quietly. "So did we," Gavin answered. "You folks getting off in Newark?" "I guess we are now." The conductor gave him a sympathetic nod before moving on. Emma leaned closer. "We'll have to take the bus back, won't we?" "If the buses are still running." "And if they aren't?" Gavin smiled gently, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Then we'll solve that problem when it shows up." Emma accepted the answer with the trust only a child could give. She rested her head against the window and watched raindrops race each other down the glass. A few minutes later, the woman's phone vibrated inside her coat pocket. The screen lit up for only a second before going dark again. 23 missed calls. None of them had names Gavin recognized. He looked away immediately. Whatever storm she was walking through belonged to her. His phone vibrated next. The notification appeared without mercy. Final appeal closed. Case status updated. He didn't open it. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket and stared through the rain-covered window. Emma reached over and quietly took his hand. Neither of them spoke again. Ahead, the lights of Newark Station slowly emerged through the darkness, growing brighter with every mile. The woman still hadn't opened her eyes. She had no idea that the stranger whose shoulder had carried her through one peaceful hour had just stepped into a future that was suddenly uncertain. The train eased toward Newark, its brakes humming beneath the floor. One by one, passengers gathered their bags and shuffled into the aisle, their faces washed pale under the fluorescent lights. Emma rubbed her eyes. "Are we almost there?" "We are." Gavin looked at the station clock through the rain-speckled window. 11:48. 12 minutes ago, he still believed there was a chance. Now, the clock seemed to belong to someone else's life. The train came to a gentle stop. The woman stirred. She blinked once, confused by the unfamiliar station outside, then slowly realized her head had been resting against Gavin's shoulder. She pulled back immediately. "Oh." Embarrassment rushed across her face. I'm so sorry." "It's all right," Gavin answered softly. "No, I don't usually." She stopped, looking around the nearly empty car. "This isn't Wilmington." "No." She glanced toward the platform, then back at him. "I missed my stop?" "You did." A worried expression crossed her face. "Why didn't you wake me?" For a brief moment, Gavin looked at the white hospice band still wrapped around her wrist. He noticed the sympathy card again. The edges were damp where her fingers had held it too tightly. He simply said, "You looked like you needed the sleep more than the stop." She stared at him. There was no attempt to impress her, no explanation, no expectation of gratitude, just a quiet sentence that somehow carried more kindness than an apology ever could. Emma smiled politely. "My dad says people don't always need fixing. Sometimes they just need a little room." Gavin gave Emma a gentle look. "Easy there." The woman let out the smallest laugh, though tears quickly gathered in her eyes. "I don't even know your names." "I'm Gavin. This is Emma." She nodded. "Dana." No last name, just Dana. She slipped the sympathy card into her coat pocket as if hiding it from the world. Then she noticed Gavin's phone lying face up beside him. The screen had awakened again. Employment appeal, closed case. Status, final. Dana looked from the phone to the empty tracks outside. A slow realization settled over her. "You missed something important." Gavin reached over and quietly turned the screen off. "It happens. But because of me." He shook his head. "It was my decision." She searched his face, almost hoping to find anger there. There wasn't any, only exhaustion. The kind that settled into someone's eyes after too many years of carrying more than they talked about. The announcement echoed through the station. End of the line. All passengers must exit the train. Dana stood, adjusting her coat. She hesitated. I don't know how to thank you. Gavin lifted Emma's backpack onto his shoulder before answering. You don't have to. Outside, the station air was sharp with cold rain. The three of them stepped onto the nearly empty platform together, strangers walking in the same direction for only a few moments longer. None of them noticed the illuminated Safe Route medical transit shuttle waiting beyond the station entrance. Within minutes, one sharp metallic crash from that vehicle would pull all three of their lives onto the same path. A cold wind swept across the nearly empty station plaza. Rain tapped against the glass shelter where the last city bus schedule flickered on an aging digital screen. Gavin adjusted Emma's backpack higher on his shoulder. We'll catch the shuttle to the transit center, he said. From there, we'll find a bus home. Emma nodded, though she was beginning to shiver. Dana stood a few feet away, searching her purse before letting out a quiet sigh. I must have left my car service waiting in Philadelphia. She almost laughed at herself. They probably gave up an hour ago. Gavin offered a small smile. Looks like we're all improvising tonight. For the first time since waking, Dana really looked at him. His jacket had been repaired more than once. The soles of his work boots were clean, but worn thin. His hands carried tiny scars around the knuckles, the kind left by years of turning wrenches instead of sitting behind a desk. He didn't look defeated, just tired. Emma tugged lightly on Gavin's sleeve. Dad, are we still going to make my therapy tomorrow? Gavin hesitated only a heartbeat. We'll be there. Dana noticed the pause. Before she could say anything, a low mechanical whine drifted across the parking lot. Near the station entrance, a white Safe Route medical transit shuttle had lowered its wheelchair platform to receive an elderly passenger bundled beneath a thick blue blanket. A driver stood beside the lift, guiding a woman in a wheelchair toward the platform. Everything appeared routine, until a loud metallic snap echoed through the rain. The left side of the platform dipped several inches. The wheelchair rolled forward. The elderly woman's eyes widened. The driver froze. Hold on, Gavin reacted before anyone else moved. His backpack hit the wet pavement. Emma, stay with Dana. He was already running. Dana instinctively reached for Emma's hand as both of them watched Gavin cross the parking lot without slowing. Halfway there, Gavin's expression changed. He wasn't looking at the passenger. He was staring at the locking latch beneath the platform, his eyes fixed on one specific piece of hardware. No, he muttered under his breath. The platform tilted another inch. The driver grabbed for the wheelchair handles, but Gavin shouted across the rain, Don't pull her! The driver looked up in confusion. If you pull now, you'll shift the load. Gavin dropped to one knee beside the lift before it could tilt any farther. His movements were calm, precise, practiced. Dana felt something tighten in her chest. This wasn't luck. This wasn't panic. It looked like a man who had seen this exact danger before, and judging by the fear in Gavin's eyes, he had been trying to stop it long before tonight. Kill the hydraulic power, Gavin shouted. The driver stared at him, frozen. I don't know how. The red emergency switch, behind your left shoulder. The driver spun around and slammed his palm against the switch. The electric motor fell silent. The platform stopped moving, but it remained tilted, one corner hanging dangerously lower than the other. Mrs. Evelyn Price gripped the arms of her wheelchair with trembling hands. Oh, Lord. It's all right, Gavin said, his voice steady despite the rain soaking through his jacket. Nobody move. We've still got this. He crouched beside the lift, his eyes racing over the mechanism. There. The latch. Exactly where he knew it would fail. From the outside, it looked perfectly engaged, but appearances meant nothing. He reached underneath and pressed the housing with 2 fingers. The metal shifted almost half an inch. Just like before, he whispered. Dana heard him. What do you mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the driver. Do you carry the emergency restraint straps? The driver blinked. Behind the passenger seats. Bring me both. The man hurried inside the shuttle. Emma remained beside Dana, watching every movement. Dad knows those lifts, she said quietly. Dana nodded without taking her eyes off Gavin. I can see that. Within seconds, the driver returned with 2 heavy nylon straps. Gavin wrapped one around the wheelchair frame and anchored it to the safety rail. The second strap secured the opposite side of the platform, preventing it from dropping any farther if the latch released completely. Only then did he allow himself a slow breath. Mrs. Price, he called gently. My name is Gavin. She looked down at him. I'm going to lower you manually. It'll be slow, but you're safe. She gave the smallest nod. I trust you. Gavin reached beneath the platform again. There should be a manual lowering valve. The driver pointed nervously. Right there. Gavin opened the access panel. There it is. He turned the valve no more than a quarter turn. The hydraulic pressure released with a soft hiss. Little by little, the platform settled toward the pavement until all 4 wheels of Mrs. Price's chair rested firmly on solid ground. Only then did Gavin loosen the straps. Applause didn't erupt. No one cheered. The few witnesses simply exhaled together, as though the entire parking lot had been holding its breath. Mrs. Price reached for Gavin's hand. Thank you. He smiled. I'm just glad you're home on the ground. As he stood, his eyes returned to the damaged latch. Rainwater ran over the metal. To everyone else, it still looked locked. Gavin pulled a small flashlight from his work bag and shined it across the mechanism. Visual inspection says it's fine, he murmured. Then he pressed against the latch with the heel of his hand. It slipped. Not much, just enough. Dana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Earlier that evening, she'd been reading reports, repeating one strange sentence. A latch can look locked without being safe. Now she had just watched a man prove those exact words without saying them aloud. She looked at Gavin differently, not as the quiet stranger who had given up his train stop, but as someone who understood this machine well enough to predict exactly how it would fail. And somewhere in the back of her mind, 7 forgotten safety reports suddenly felt far less anonymous. The shuttle driver wiped rain from his forehead, still breathing hard. I've never seen anything like that. Gavin stood and brushed water from his hands. You probably have, he said quietly. You just didn't know what you were looking at. The driver frowned. What do you mean? Gavin pointed toward the latch assembly beneath the platform. It passes a visual check. He crouched again, inviting the driver closer. Look at it. The driver leaned down. It looks locked. It does. Gavin reached out, but stopped short of touching the mechanism. Now don't trust your eyes. He pressed firmly against the edge of the housing with the heel of his hand. The latch shifted just enough to produce a dull, metallic click. There. The driver's face lost its color. It moved. Exactly. Dana stepped closer. You knew where to push. I've tested this design hundreds of times. You've seen it fail before? Gavin hesitated. Not with people on it. His answer landed heavily in the quiet parking lot. But enough times during inspections. Emma watched her father carefully. She had heard that tone before. It was the one he used when he was trying not to say more than he should. The station supervisor hurried over, radio crackling at his shoulder. Is everyone all right? Mrs. Price smiled weakly. This gentleman kept me from falling. The supervisor nodded gratefully. Sir, what's your name? We'd like it for the incident report. Gavin Hartley? And your employer? There was a pause. Emma looked down. Gavin answered anyway. I was with Safe Route Medical Transit. Was? I've been suspended. The supervisor blinked in surprise. You work on these lifts? I did. Dana's eyes lifted from the damaged latch to Gavin's face. Suspended. Not fired for poor performance. Not careless. Not inexperienced. A technician who knew the equipment better than anyone standing there had somehow been pushed out of the very company that depended on it. The driver shook his head. Then they need you back. Gavin gave a tired smile. That's not my decision anymore. A maintenance van rolled into the lot, amber lights flashing across the rain. 2 company supervisors climbed out. One of them immediately walked toward the damaged shuttle without asking if Mrs. Price was all right. The other spotted Gavin. His expression hardened. You. Gavin recognized him at once. Not Mitchell Raines, but one of Mitchell's field supervisors. What are you doing here? The man demanded. He kept a passenger from getting hurt, Dana answered before Gavin could speak. The supervisor barely acknowledged her. Instead, his eyes settled on Gavin with unmistakable irritation. You were told not to touch company equipment while under suspension. The words hung in the cold night air. Emma instinctively stepped closer to her father. Dana slowly turned toward the supervisor. For the first time that evening, she sensed this wasn't simply a mechanical failure. It was the beginning of something that had been hidden for a very long time. Rain drummed steadily against the roof of the shuttle, while the field supervisor strode toward Gavin, his company badge swinging with every step. You heard me, he said sharply. You're under suspension. You had no authority to touch this vehicle. Gavin didn't raise his voice. I had authority to keep someone from getting hurt. Mrs. Evelyn Price looked from one man to the other, still wrapped in her blanket. He saved my life. The supervisor barely acknowledged her. That's not the issue. It should be, Dana said quietly. He glanced at her for the first time. Ma'am, this is an internal company matter. It became everyone's matter the moment that platform failed. The supervisor sighed impatiently. The lift malfunctioned. Maintenance will inspect it. Gavin looked directly at the damaged latch. No. The man frowned. No. It didn't malfunction. A heavy silence settled over the parking lot. It performed exactly the way this latch performs after enough wear. The supervisor folded his arms. You're making assumptions. I'm making an inspection. Without waiting for permission, Gavin knelt beside the platform once more. He pointed toward the locking mechanism. Visual check. His flashlight swept across the latch. It looked secure. Then he reached into his backpack and removed a slim inspection gauge, scratched from years of use. Dana noticed how naturally it fit in his hand. Not like a tool, like part of him. Gavin slid the gauge into a narrow gap beside the latch. It slipped farther than it should have. The driver leaned closer. Is that bad? It should never fit. Gavin pressed gently against the platform. Another metallic click echoed through the rain. The latch shifted again. This is why inspections require 3 steps. He looked at the driver. Eyes. He pressed the latch again. Hands. Then he rested part of his weight against the platform. And a live load test. The platform dipped almost imperceptibly. That's where it fails. Dana felt every word settle into place. The reports, the identical wording, the 3-step inspection. She had read those exact procedures before, not once, 7 times. The supervisor reached down and pulled the gauge away. That's enough. It isn't enough, Gavin replied. It never was. The supervisor's expression hardened. You've already caused enough problems for this company. Emma's small voice broke the tension. My dad doesn't cause problems. Everyone looked toward her. He fixes them. For a brief second, no one spoke. The field supervisor looked away first. He pulled out his phone and stepped several yards into the rain. Dana could hear only fragments of the conversation. Yes. He's here. Interfered with the vehicle. Yes, Mr. Raines. When he returned, His face was noticeably more rigid. Regional operations is on the way. Gavin understood exactly what that meant. Mitchell Raines wasn't sending someone else. He was coming himself. Emma quietly reached for her father's hand. Gavin squeezed hers without taking his eyes off the approaching headlights now turning into the station entrance. Some confrontations couldn't be postponed forever. This one had finally caught up with him. The black SUV rolled to a stop beside the disabled shuttle, its headlights washing the rain-soaked pavement in white. The driver's door opened first, then a tall man in a dark overcoat stepped out without bothering to raise an umbrella. Mitchell Raines. Even before he reached the platform, people instinctively moved aside. His eyes went straight to Gavin. "I had a feeling I'd find you wherever there was trouble." Gavin didn't answer. Mitchell looked at the immobilized shuttle, the emergency straps securing the lift, and finally at Mrs. Evelyn Price, now safely on solid ground. "What happened here?" he asked. "The platform failed," the driver replied. "Mr. Hartley stabilized it before—" Mitchell cut him off. "I didn't ask who played the hero." The driver fell silent. Dana studied Mitchell carefully. There wasn't a trace of concern for the passenger, only irritation that the scene had attracted attention. Mitchell turned back to Gavin. "You violated the terms of your suspension. I prevented an accident. You interfered with company equipment." Mrs. Price spoke before Gavin could. "If he hadn't, I would have been the one lying on this pavement." Mitchell offered her a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "I'm very glad you're all right, ma'am." Then he looked back at Gavin, as if the elderly woman had already disappeared from the conversation. "We'll handle this internally." Gavin shook his head. "No." The single word surprised everyone. Mitchell's expression hardened. "No, the shuttle doesn't move. The inspection team will decide that. They don't need to." Gavin pointed toward the latch. "The evidence is right there." Mitchell folded his arms. "I've already reviewed your claims months ago." Dana's attention sharpened. Months ago. So this wasn't the first time. Gavin reached into his backpack and removed the worn flashlight again. "I documented this defect. I remember. I filed every inspection. I remember. I requested replacement of the latch assemblies." Mitchell stepped closer until they stood only a few feet apart. "And I remember explaining that your conclusions weren't supported." Rainwater dripped from the edge of Gavin's hood. "They're being supported right now." Neither man blinked. Emma quietly slipped her hand into her father's. She recognized the silence. It wasn't fear. It was the moment her father always became impossible to push backward. Dana looked from Mitchell to Gavin. One man defended a report. The other defended reality. The difference suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. Mitchell pulled a folded document from his leather portfolio. "I'll make this simple." He held the paper toward Gavin. "Sign a statement confirming you acted outside company procedures and that this incident resulted from unauthorized interference." The driver stared in disbelief. "But he fixed—" Mitchell silenced him with a glance. "You sign this," he continued, "and we can discuss reopening your employment file." Emma looked up at her father. "Dad." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Gavin slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Instead of taking the pen Mitchell offered, he pulled out a small wooden house keychain. The words carved into it caught the station lights. "Everyone gets home." His thumb rested across the worn wood for only a second. Then he quietly placed the unsigned document back into Mitchell's hands. "No." The rain seemed louder than before. Mrs. Price closed her eyes. Dana felt something shift inside her. This wasn't a man trying to win his job back. This was a father refusing to sell the truth. And for the first time that night, Mitchell Raines looked less like the person in control, and more like the person afraid of what the truth might expose. Mitchell slowly lowered the unsigned statement, folding it with deliberate care. You always did have a talent for making simple situations complicated. Gavin met his eyes without flinching. No. His voice was calm. I had a talent for finding problems before people got hurt. The words lingered in the damp night air. Mitchell forced a thin smile. And yet here we are. He turned toward the driver. Remove the emergency straps. Gavin stepped forward. No one touches that platform. I gave an order. And I'm telling you, the lift is unsafe. Mitchell's patience finally cracked. You are no longer employed by this company. The shout echoed across the nearly empty station. Emma instinctively tightened her grip on her father's hand. Gavin remained perfectly still. That doesn't change physics. For a moment, even the rain seemed quieter. Dana watched both men carefully. One argued from authority, the other from evidence. She had spent years in boardrooms where the louder voice usually won. Tonight, the quieter one carried more weight. Mitchell gestured impatiently toward the maintenance crew that had just arrived. Reset the platform. One technician hesitated. Sir, maybe we should inspect the latch first. I said reset it. Neither technician moved. They had all watched Gavin stabilize the lift. They had all seen the latch shift under pressure. Mitchell noticed their hesitation. I'll note every refusal in tomorrow's reports. The younger technician looked down. Gavin spoke before either man had to choose. Don't risk your licenses. Mitchell spun back toward him. You don't speak for my employees. No. I speak for the passenger who almost got hurt. Mrs. Evelyn Price slowly rolled her wheelchair forward a few inches. I may be old, she said, but I know who was trying to help me. Mitchell offered another practiced smile. And we're grateful you're safe. She shook her head. No. The single word sounded surprisingly firm. I'm grateful to him. She pointed toward Gavin. You arrived after everything important had already happened. Silence spread through the group. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Dana looked down at the folded sympathy card still resting in her coat pocket. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt something stronger than grief. She felt responsibility, not because she knew who Gavin was. She still didn't. But because a company carrying her family name had created a moment where the man protecting a passenger was being treated like the problem. Her phone vibrated. An unread folder she had opened earlier that afternoon remained on the screen. 7 archived safety reports. She tapped the first one. The opening sentence appeared immediately. A latch may appear fully engaged during visual inspection while remaining unsafe under live load. Her eyes lifted toward Gavin. Just minutes earlier, he demonstrated those exact words without seeing the report in her hand. Not similar words. The same idea. The same sequence. Visual inspection. Hand pressure. Live load test. Her heartbeat quickened. That couldn't be coincidence. She looked at Gavin again. This time, not as the stranger from the train or the man who had let her sleep. She looked at him as someone whose voice she might have encountered long before tonight, only stripped of its name before it ever reached her desk. And for the first time, Dana quietly wondered a question that would change everything. Who had made sure she never knew who Gavin Hartley really was? She didn't ask it aloud. Not yet. Instead, she slipped her phone back into her coat pocket and watched Mitchell carefully. The regional operations manager wasn't looking at the damaged lift anymore. He wasn't looking at Mrs. Price either. He was watching Gavin. Not with frustration, with calculation. Mitchell took one slow step closer. You've made your point. Gavin didn't answer. But if you keep this going, Mitchell continued, lowering his voice, you'll hurt people who had nothing to do with this. Emma frowned. What does that mean? It means, Mitchell replied, forcing a polite smile toward her. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult business decisions. Gavin gently rested a hand on Emma's shoulder. "No," he said. "Grown-ups have to make responsible decisions." Mitchell's expression tightened. "You've always enjoyed correcting people." "I've always corrected machines." "And paperwork." When the paperwork was wrong. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the shuttle lift. One of the maintenance technicians quietly took several photos of the damaged latch before anyone could stop him. Mitchell noticed. "No pictures." The technician hesitated. "It's standard documentation." "I said no pictures." Dana's eyes narrowed. Why would anyone object to documenting a mechanical failure? The technician slowly lowered his phone, but not before saving the images. Mrs. Price looked toward Gavin. "Young man." He smiled at the familiar expression. "I'm probably not young anymore." "You are to me." She reached into the blanket covering her lap and lightly squeezed his hand. "My husband fixed elevators for 30 years. Gavin listened. "He used to tell me something." She looked at the damaged platform. "Machines don't lie. People sometimes do." The parking lot fell quiet. Even Mitchell didn't interrupt. Mrs. Price nodded toward the latch. "I don't know much about these lifts." She looked at Gavin. "But I know what honesty sounds like." Gavin lowered his eyes for a moment. "Thank you." A patrol officer arrived with the station supervisor to complete an incident report. The officer surveyed the scene. "Who was operating the lift?" The driver raised his hand. "And who stabilized it?" Several people answered at once. "Him." Every finger pointed toward Gavin. The officer walked over. "Sir, I'll need your statement." Before Gavin could respond, Mitchell stepped between them. "This involves company equipment. Legal will provide the documentation." The officer remained calm. I asked the witness. For the first time that evening, Mitchell had no immediate response. Dana watched the exchange in silence. She had attended hundreds of executive meetings. She had negotiated acquisitions worth millions of dollars. Yet nothing she had seen in those rooms felt as revealing as this rain-soaked parking lot. A suspended technician was willing to risk everything to tell the truth. A regional manager seemed determined to control every sentence spoken about a broken lift. Those weren't equal reactions. They came from people protecting very different things. As the officer opened his notebook, Dana's phone vibrated again. Another archived safety report surfaced on the screen. This one contained a handwritten note scanned into the file. 3-step inspection completed. Recommend immediate removal from service before passenger injury occurs. The author's name had been blacked out. Dana slowly looked up. Then she looked directly at Gavin. The careful language, the calm confidence, the exact inspection sequence, the quiet refusal to compromise. Piece by piece, the anonymous technician from those reports was beginning to take on a face. And Dana realized she was no longer trying to understand what had happened to the shuttle. She was trying to understand what had happened to the man standing beside it. The patrol officer uncapped his pen. "Mr. Hartley, could you walk me through exactly what you saw?" Gavin nodded. "The platform was already lowering when I heard the latch snap. The left side dropped under load. I told the driver to shut off hydraulic power before the platform could twist any farther." The officer wrote steadily. "And after that?" "I secured the wheelchair with emergency restraint straps, released the pressure through the manual lowering valve, and brought the platform down under control." The officer paused. "You've done this before." "I've trained people to do it." Dana caught that sentence. Not fixed. Trained. Mitchell stepped in before the conversation could continue. "The officer doesn't need his resume." The officer looked up. I asked the witness to describe what happened. Mitchell forced another tight smile. Of course. But his impatience was becoming harder to hide. A second safe route vehicle pulled into the lot. 2 mechanics climbed out carrying diagnostic equipment. One of them recognized Gavin immediately. "Hey." He stopped himself. The younger mechanic glanced toward Mitchell before speaking again. Mr. Hartley. Gavin gave him a polite nod. Ben. Ben looked at the damaged lift and quietly exhaled. You were right. Mitchell turned sharply. What did you say? Ben swallowed. I said he identified the failure. Mitchell took one step closer. I suggest you focus on tonight's inspection instead of discussing old disagreements. Ben lowered his eyes, but not before Dana noticed the discomfort on his face. It wasn't fear of the broken lift. It was fear of saying the wrong thing. Emma stood beside her father, hugging her backpack against the cold. Dad, he looked down. You missed dinner. He smiled faintly. So did you. I'm okay. She reached into the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out a small packet of peanut butter crackers. I saved these. Gavin looked at the crackers for a second before quietly breaking the package in half. You eat first. Emma frowned. We always split. I know. She smiled. So that's what we're doing. Dana watched the exchange without saying a word. No speeches, no complaints, just a father making sure his daughter ate before he did. The simplicity of it struck her harder than she expected. Across the parking lot, Mrs. Price called softly. Young lady. Dana walked over. Mrs. Price motioned toward Gavin. Whatever people say about him. She smiled gently. I watched that man run toward danger while everyone else froze. Dinah looked back across the rain. Gavin was answering another question from the patrol officer, occasionally gesturing toward the damaged latch with quiet precision. There was no performance in him, no attempt to impress anyone. He simply wanted the truth written down correctly. The officer finally closed his notebook. I appreciate your statement. Then he looked toward Mitchell. I'll also need copies of any previous maintenance reports involving this lift model. For the first time that evening, Mitchell hesitated, only for a heartbeat. But Dana noticed. So there are previous reports? The officer asked. Mitchell answered carefully. We'll see what's relevant. Dana's pulse quickened. Not if there were reports. Which ones would be shown? That tiny difference said more than an hour of arguments ever could. She slipped her phone from her pocket again and opened the folder containing the archived safety reports. 7 files. Each missing the author's name. Each carrying the same careful language. And standing only a few yards away was the only man she'd ever met whose actions matched every line she had just reread. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were beginning to fit together. Dana knew she couldn't leave Newark without learning one thing. Why had every warning reached her desk, except the name of the man who had written them? The question refused to leave Dana's mind. She stepped away from the crowd just enough to shield her phone from the rain and opened the oldest report in the archive. The metadata had been stripped clean. No technician's name, no employee ID. Only a routing history showing that every report had passed through regional operations before reaching corporate compliance. Regional operations. Mitchell. She slowly looked up. He was already speaking with the maintenance crew, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. One mechanic glanced toward Gavin before reluctantly nodding. Dana slipped the phone back into her pocket. Something wasn't broken only inside the shuttle. Something was broken inside the company itself. Nearby, the patrol officer thanked Mrs. Price for her statement before leaving the driver with a copy of the incident number. If anything changes, he said, call us immediately. The driver nodded. I will. As the officer walked away, Gavin picked up his backpack from the wet pavement. He brushed the dirt from one strap and turned to Emma. We should head for the bus. Emma looked at the station clock. It's after midnight. It is. Will there still be one? I hope so. Dana stepped toward them. Please, let me at least pay for a ride home. Gavin smiled politely. I appreciate that. You already helped me tonight. You don't owe us anything. I do. He gently shook his head. No. There wasn't pride in his answer. There was dignity. Dana wasn't used to hearing that word without it being spoken. She reached into her purse anyway. Then let me buy Emma something warm to eat. Before Gavin could answer, Emma tugged lightly on his sleeve. Dad? He knelt beside her. What is it? She whispered something only he could hear. He smiled. Then he stood again. Thank you, he said to Dana. But she's already decided. Emma looked up with an apologetic smile. My dad says accepting kindness is different from depending on it. Dana felt her throat tighten. Children repeated what they heard every day. Those words hadn't appeared by accident. A city bus pulled into the terminal across the street, its brakes sighing as the doors opened. The destination sign read, Wilmington Via Transit Center. That's ours, Gavin said. Emma slipped her small hand into his. As they started walking, Ben hurried after them. Mr. Hartley. Gavin turned. Ben reached into his jacket and quietly handed him a folded business envelope. I thought you should have this. Gavin frowned. What's inside? I can't say here. Mitchell looked over his shoulder. Ben immediately stepped back. It's just something you should read. Gavin nodded once and tucked the envelope into his backpack without opening it. Dana noticed Ben's nervous expression. Whatever he had just handed over wasn't casual. It looked like someone finally deciding they could no longer stay silent. Across the lot, Mitchell watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. He didn't ask what Ben had given Gavin. He already seemed to know, and that worried Dana even more. As the bus doors began to close, Gavin helped Emma climb aboard before taking one last look at the disabled shuttle. The platform still hung slightly crooked beneath the vehicle, a machine waiting for someone to tell the truth about why it had failed. Dana remained standing in the rain, watching the bus pull away into the darkness. Tonight had begun with a stranger giving her a place to rest. It ended with a question she could no longer ignore. If Gavin Hartley had been telling the truth all along, who had been making sure no one at the top ever heard his voice? In the end, it wasn't the report that people remembered most. It was the moment Gavin quietly let the train doors close, giving a grieving stranger one more hour of peace, even though it cost him his own chance to save his job. This story reminds us that the strongest actions are often the quietest ones. Real character isn't measured by the promises we make. It's revealed by what we choose to do when no one is watching. Today, think about one small moment when you can put someone else's need ahead of your own, even if no one ever thanks you for it. The next time life asks you to choose between convenience and doing what's right, remember what Gavin Hartley chose on that rainy night. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments so I know it stayed with you. And tell me this. Would you have stepped off the train, or would you have made the same choice Gavin did? Stay with me, because the next story may leave you asking an even harder question.